I've been carrying this hurt in my chest for months now, and tonight it finally spilled over like coffee from an overfilled cup. You know that feeling when you realize you've become invisible in your own family? When the people you've helped, supported, and loved treat you like furniture. Always there, rarely noticed, never truly appreciated. My name is Margaret, and at 67, I thought I'd earned some respect. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband died young, worked 2 jobs to put them through college, and somehow managed to save enough money to help when life got tough. My son David married Rebecca 5 years ago, and I genuinely tried to welcome her with open arms. I helped with their wedding, babysat their twins when they needed date nights, and always brought homemade apple pie to family gatherings, the recipe my mother taught me back in Ohio. Our small suburban neighborhood in Connecticut feels different now than when I first moved here. The maple trees lining Elm Street have grown taller, their branches creating a canopy that filters the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns on the sidewalk. My little blue house with white shutters sits quietly between the Johnsons' modern renovation and the Martinez family's vibrant garden. I've watched children grow up, seen families move in and out, and somehow became the neighborhood grandmother everyone waves to, but rarely stops to chat with. Rebecca works in marketing for a boutique consulting firm downtown. She's ambitious, smart, and undeniably successful. But there's something in the way she looks at me sometimes, like I'm a relic from a bygone era, someone who doesn't quite understand the modern world of social media strategies and client presentations. David, my sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions and call me his best girl, now seems caught between his wife's subtle dismissiveness and his genuine love for his mother. The twins, Emma and Jake, are 7 now. They light up when I walk into a room, racing to hug my legs and show me their latest drawings or Lego creations. But even with them, I notice how Rebecca quickly redirects their attention, suggesting they give Grandma some space or reminding them about screen time limits when I'm trying to read them stories. I've bitten my tongue through countless small slights, the family photos where I'm cropped out before posting on Instagram, the birthday party planning sessions where my suggestions are politely dismissed, the way Rebecca introduces me to her friends as David's mom rather than using my name, as if my identity begins and ends with my relationship to her husband. But tonight's party was supposed to be different. Rebecca got a promotion, senior marketing director, and she wanted to celebrate with friends and family. I spent the afternoon making my famous spinach and artichoke dip, the one that always disappears first at gatherings. I even bought a new blouse, navy blue with small pearl buttons, hoping to look presentable among her younger, more fashionable friends. As I drove up their driveway, past the perfectly manicured lawn and the new BMW Rebecca insisted they needed for her professional image, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that appears whenever I'm about to enter spaces where I'm tolerated rather than welcomed. Little did I know that tonight would be the night everything changed, the night I'd discover just how little they thought of me and how much power I actually held in my weathered hands. The moment I walked into Rebecca's living room, I knew something was different. The space buzzed with energy. Young professionals in crisp blazers and cocktail dresses, holding wine glasses and discussing quarterly reports and market trends. Rebecca had transformed their home into something from a magazine spread. String lights draped artfully across the ceiling, a charcuterie board that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and those trendy mason jar centerpieces filled with white roses. "Margaret, you made it!" Rebecca's voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize, bright and welcoming for the audience, but somehow hollow underneath. She air-kissed my cheek, careful not to disturb her perfectly applied lipstick, and guided me toward the kitchen island where drinks were being served. "I brought the spinach dip," I said, holding up my covered casserole dish, "and some of those dinner rolls you mentioned liking." "Oh, how thoughtful," she replied, already scanning the room for more important guests to greet. "Just set those anywhere. Help yourself to drinks. There's wine, beer, those fancy seltzers David likes." That's when I saw it. The drink station was set up with an array of plastic cups, each labeled with black marker in Rebecca's neat handwriting. There were cups for the boss lady, Rebecca's obviously, proud hubby, David's, marketing queen, her best friend Sarah, the comedian, her colleague Mike, and various other playful titles for the guests. And then I found mine, in slightly smaller handwriting, tucked behind the others like an afterthought, the old lady who's always around. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there staring at those words, feeling the party continue around me like I was trapped in a snow globe. The laughter seemed louder, the conversations more animated, and I felt smaller than I had in years. Not just older, smaller, insignificant, a burden to be tolerated rather than a person to be celebrated. I picked up the cup with trembling fingers. The plastic felt cheap and flimsy, nothing like the elegant wine glasses the other guests were using. Even the drink selection felt like an afterthought. While others enjoyed craft beer and imported wine, my options seemed limited to generic soda and tap water. "Mom, there you are!" David appeared beside me, his face flushed with excitement and probably a beer or two. "Isn't this great? Becca really outdid herself with the party planning." I held up my cup, unable to speak for a moment. David's eyes widened as he read the label, and I watched his expression shift from celebration to confusion to something that might have been shame. "Mom, I'm sure she didn't mean what exactly?" I finally found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. "Didn't mean to write exactly what she thinks of me?" The music seemed to fade into background noise as David struggled for words. Around us, Rebecca's colleagues shared stories about client victories and weekend trips to the Hamptons. Someone laughed loudly at a joke I couldn't hear, and I wondered if they were laughing at me, the old lady who's always around, standing in their modern, successful world with her homemade dip and discount store blouse. "Let me talk to her," David whispered, but I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, don't make a scene at her party. She worked hard for this promotion." I filled my labeled cup with ice water and retreated to a corner near the bookshelf, where I could observe without being observed. From there, I watched Rebecca work the room like the professional she was, confident, charming, completely in her element. She'd built something impressive, I had to admit. Her career, her home, her social circle, all of it polished and purposeful. But as I stood there, sipping water from a cup that reduced me to a punchline, I realized something that would change everything. These people, impressed by Rebecca's success and sophistication, had no idea about the phone call she'd made 18 months ago, the desperate, tearful conversation where she'd begged for help when her business was failing. They didn't know about the check I'd written or the savings account I'd emptied to save her dreams. And as I watched her accept congratulations and praise from her guests, I decided it was time they learned the truth about who really deserved to be celebrated tonight. What would you do in my place? Would you stay silent, or would you find a way to show them who you really are? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you want to see how this story unfolds. I spent the next hour nursing that cup of water, watching the party unfold around me like a movie I wasn't really part of. The spinach dip I'd brought sat untouched on the counter while guests gravitated toward the expensive catered appetizers. My dinner rolls remained in their basket, covered with the checkered cloth I'd embroidered myself, invisible among the artisanal breads and imported cheeses. Every few minutes, someone would glance my way with that polite smile people reserve for elderly relatives, acknowledgement without engagement. A few of David's friends from college stopped by to say hello, asking about my health and the weather with the kind of surface-level interest that fills silence without creating connection. I answered their questions about my garden and my book club, all while that cup label seemed to burn in my peripheral vision. Rebecca floated through the crowd like she was born for this, discussing market penetration strategies with one group, sharing renovation plans with another. She'd changed clothes twice since I arrived, first from her work blazer into a flowing midi dress, then into designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Each outfit change was announced with a little laugh about wanting to be comfortable for the real celebration. I found myself studying the other guests, trying to understand Rebecca's world through their conversations. There was Marcus, her business partner, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s who kept checking his phone and talking about scaling opportunities. Sarah, her college roommate turned marketing director at a competing firm, wore jewelry that caught the light every time she gestured. And then there was Jennifer, Rebecca's mentor, a woman about my age who commanded respect every time she spoke about industry trends and leadership strategies. Watching Jennifer, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Here was a woman my age who was celebrated, consulted, valued for her experience and wisdom. She wore her silver hair like a crown and spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never been labeled the old lady who's always around. When she mentioned her grandchildren, it was with pride, not as an apology for taking up space in a younger person's world. Around 9 o'clock, as the party began to settle into smaller conversation clusters, I overheard Rebecca talking to a group near the fireplace. She was sharing the story of her promotion, how she'd built her client base from nothing and took calculated risks that paid off. The admiration in her listeners' faces was genuine. She really had accomplished something impressive. The best part, she continued, gesturing with her wine glass, is that I did it all on my own terms. No investors breathing down my neck, no corporate politics to navigate, just pure determination and smart business decisions. I felt my chest tighten. Not because she was lying exactly, but because the story was so incomplete, like describing a beautiful garden without mentioning the soil, the water, or the hands that planted the seeds. David appeared beside me again, this time with Emma and Jake in tow. The twins had been upstairs playing video games, but came down to say goodnight before their babysitter took them home. "Grandma," Emma threw her arms around my waist. "Did you see Mommy's party? It's so fancy." "It certainly is, sweetheart," I said, smoothing her hair. "Your mommy worked very hard for this." Jake tugged on my sleeve. "Are you sad, Grandma? You look sad. Children see everything, don't they?" I knelt down to his level, my knees protesting the movement. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, buddy, but I'm not sad when I'm with you and Emma." "Will you come to my soccer game on Saturday?" he asked. "Coach says parents and grandparents can bring snacks." "I wouldn't miss it," I promised, though I wondered if Rebecca would find a way to discourage my attendance, like she had with the school play last month. As the babysitter gathered the children's things, I heard Rebecca's voice rise slightly from across the room. She was telling someone about her independence and how she'd never had to rely on anyone else's money to build her business. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they erased me so completely. I looked down at my cup again, the old lady who's always around, and realized that Rebecca truly saw me as nothing more than that, a fixture, a piece of furniture that occasionally needed acknowledgement but never deserved credit. But I knew something she'd forgotten. Something that could change how every person in this room saw both of us. The question was whether I had the courage to use it, and whether the cost of staying silent had finally become too high to bear. Tomorrow, I would have to decide if being always around was enough, or if it was time to remind everyone exactly why I'd earned the right to be here. By 10 o'clock, the party had settled into that comfortable rhythm of successful gatherings, smaller groups engaged in deeper conversations, the music turned down to accommodate actual discussion, and Rebecca glowing with the satisfaction of an event well executed. I'd moved from my corner by the bookshelf to a chair near the kitchen, where I could observe without seeming to lurk. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. Marcus, Rebecca's business partner, was speaking to a small group that included Jennifer, the respected older woman I'd noticed earlier. "What I admire most about Rebecca," he was saying, "is her financial discipline. When the business hit that rough patch last year, she found a way to keep us afloat without taking on debt or giving up equity. That kind of cash flow management is rare in someone so young." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Smart business owners know that maintaining control of your company is worth more than quick capital. Too many entrepreneurs get desperate and make deals they later regret." "Exactly," Rebecca chimed in, joining their circle with a fresh glass of wine. "I've always believed that if you can't fund your own growth, you're not ready to grow. It was scary for a few months there, but I'm glad I stuck to my principles." Sarah raised her glass. "To Rebecca, proof that you can build an empire without compromising your values or your independence." The group toasted, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I stood up slowly, my decision made not in my head, but in my bones, in the place where truth lives when it's been buried too long under politeness and family harmony. I walked over to their group, my sensible shoes silent on Rebecca's hardwood floors. The conversation paused as they noticed my approach. Polite smiles, the kind of inclusive gesture people make when an elderly relative joins a discussion they assume she won't understand. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about financial independence and business principles." Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, Mom, Margaret, we were just talking shop, probably pretty boring for you." "Actually," I said, looking directly at Marcus and Jennifer, "I find business discussions fascinating, especially when they involve my family. The group's attention sharpened. Jennifer, in particular, seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. She set down her wine glass and gave me her full attention, the kind of respect I hadn't felt in this house for months. "You see," I continued, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet space around us, "I've been listening to Rebecca share her success story tonight, and it's truly impressive. Building a business, managing cash flow, maintaining independence, these are remarkable achievements for someone her age." Rebecca's face began to show the first signs of uncertainty. "Mom Margaret, maybe we should—" "But I think," I said, my words measured and calm, "that your friends might be interested in the complete story, especially the part about that phone call 18 months ago." The silence that followed was different from the comfortable party quiet. This was the kind of silence that precedes revelation, when everyone in a room senses that something important is about to shift. Marcus glanced between Rebecca and me, his business instincts clearly picking up on the tension. Jennifer's eyes never left my face, and I could see the intelligence there, the recognition that she was witnessing something significant. Rebecca's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. "I think maybe we should discuss this privately." "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," I said, my voice still gentle but carrying a strength I'd forgotten I possessed. "After all, you've been sharing your business story so openly tonight. I'm sure your colleagues would appreciate knowing about all the factors that contributed to your success." David appeared at the edge of our circle, drawn by some instinct that told him his mother was about to change the trajectory of his wife's celebration. But I was past the point of protecting Rebecca's comfort at the expense of my own dignity. I looked around the group, these successful, accomplished people who had spent the evening admiring Rebecca's independence and financial acumen. Soon, they would learn the truth about the old lady who's always around and exactly what role she'd played in the success story they'd been celebrating. The question was no longer whether I would speak. The question was whether Rebecca would find the courage to tell the truth herself, or if I would have to do it for her. "What would you do in my place? Would you protect the family peace, or would you finally claim the recognition you deserve?" Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this impossible situation. The circle around us had grown without anyone seeming to notice. Conversations throughout the room had gradually quieted as people sensed the shift in energy, the way animals sense a coming storm. Rebecca's carefully orchestrated celebration was about to become something entirely different, and I could see in her eyes that she knew it. "Mom Margaret," she said, her voice carrying a note of pleading disguised as casual dismissal. "I'm sure everyone would rather hear about Jennifer's new consulting contract than old family stories. But Jennifer, bless her, wasn't about to be redirected. Actually, I'm quite interested in family stories, especially when they relate to business. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I know had family support that made all the difference." She looked at me with genuine curiosity. "Please, continue." I felt a moment of doubt, not about the truth I was preparing to tell, but about the consequences. Once these words were spoken, there would be no taking them back. Rebecca's relationship with her colleagues, her carefully crafted image of independence, David's position between his wife and his mother, all of it would change. But then I remembered the cup in my hand, still labeled with those dismissive words. I thought about the months of being treated like an inconvenience, the way my contributions were minimized or ignored entirely. I thought about Emma and Jake, and what lessons they were learning about how to treat the people who love and support them. 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly in the now quiet room. Rebecca called me at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Rebecca's face had gone pale. "Please don't." She told me that her biggest client had just pulled their contract, I continued, looking directly at Marcus, who I now realized must have been part of that crisis. 3 months of work, unpaid. The client claimed the deliverables didn't meet their standards, but Rebecca suspected they'd simply found a cheaper alternative and were using quality as an excuse to break the contract. Marcus's expression shifted to recognition and discomfort. He clearly remembered this situation and probably remembered it differently than Rebecca had presented it to her family. "The business had been operating on thin margins," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. Rebecca had invested everything in growth. New equipment, additional staff, a larger office space. When that client payment disappeared, she couldn't make payroll. She couldn't pay rent. She was facing the choice between laying off her employees or closing the business entirely. Sarah set down her drink, her face showing the dawning realization of where this story was heading. Around us, the party had essentially stopped. Even the background music seemed quieter, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She asked me for help, I said, my eyes finding Rebecca's across the circle. Not a loan, not an investment. Help. She needed $47,000 to keep the business afloat until she could secure new clients and rebuild her cash flow. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. $47,000 wasn't pocket change for anyone, but for a woman my age on a fixed income, it represented a significant portion of my life savings. I didn't hesitate, I continued. I went to the bank the next morning and withdrew the money from my retirement account. The account I'd been building since I was 35 years old, adding to it every month even when money was tight, even when David needed help with college expenses, even when my own roof needed repairs. The silence in the room was now complete. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. Rebecca was staring at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I gave her the money with no contract, no repayment schedule, no interest. Just a mother-in-law helping her son's wife save her dreams. I paused, letting that sink in. The business survived. It grew. It became the success story you've all been celebrating tonight. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Rebecca, I had no idea. Because she never told you, I said gently. She never told anyone. And that was her choice to make. Until tonight, when I heard her tell you all about her financial independence and her principles about not taking on debt or giving up equity, I looked around the circle of faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some calculating the implications of what they'd just learned. These were business people. They understood exactly what my contribution had meant to Rebecca's success. I didn't expect public recognition, I said, my voice soft but clear. I didn't need my name on the business cards or a percentage of the profits, but I also didn't expect to be labeled as the old lady who's always around at the party celebrating the success I helped make possible. Rebecca finally looked up, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. The room waited for her response, for some explanation or acknowledgement, but before she could speak, someone else's voice cut through the tension. Well, said a voice from the doorway, this certainly explains a lot. We all turned to see who had spoken, and I realized that the most important part of this story was just beginning. The voice belonged to Tom Richardson, Rebecca's former business mentor and the man who had originally recommended her for the promotion she was celebrating tonight. He stood in the doorway with his coat still on, having apparently arrived late to the party, and walked into the middle of my revelation. Tom was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention in boardrooms across Connecticut. More importantly, he was someone whose opinion carried weight in Rebecca's professional circle. His unexpected arrival felt like divine intervention, or perhaps just the universe's way of ensuring that truth had the right audience. Tom? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. I didn't know you were coming. I told you I'd try to make it after my dinner meeting, he said, his eyes moving between Rebecca and me with obvious curiosity. I apologize for being late, but it sounds like I arrived at exactly the right moment. He stepped into the room, and I noticed how the other guests unconsciously made space for him. This was clearly someone they all respected, someone whose presence elevated the significance of whatever was happening. Mrs. He looked at me expectantly. Margaret, I said, extending my hand. Margaret Coleman, David's mother. Ah, the famous Margaret, Tom said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. Rebecca has mentioned you many times, though apparently not in the context I just overheard. The room remained frozen in that moment of suspended tension. Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear into the hardwood floors, while her colleagues tried to process what they'd just learned about their successful, independent friend. Tom removed his coat and draped it over a chair, clearly settling in for whatever was about to unfold. You know, Margaret, I've been wondering about something for quite some time. When Rebecca's business suddenly stabilized after that client crisis, I was impressed by how quickly she managed to secure the capital she needed. She was rather vague about the details, mentioned something about creative financing solutions. He looked directly at Rebecca, his expression kind but expectant. I assumed she'd found an angel investor or perhaps taken out a business loan, But what I just heard suggests the solution was much more personal. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca, if you had family backing, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Most successful businesses have some form of family investment. It wasn't an investment, I said quietly. It was a gift. No strings attached, no expectation of return. Just a mother-in-law who believed in her daughter-in-law's dreams. Jennifer, the older woman whose respect I'd been craving all evening, stepped forward. Margaret, may I ask, did you have business experience yourself? It takes considerable insight to recognize a viable business worth saving. I felt a flush of pride at her question. I managed the accounting department for a manufacturing company for 32 years. I understood cash flow, payroll pressures, the difference between a temporary setback and a fundamental business problem. When Rebecca explained the situation, I could see that her business model was sound. She just needed bridge financing to weather the crisis. Tom nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of analysis a good investor would make. You saw the potential where others might have seen only risk. But I wasn't an investor, I corrected gently. I was family, and family helps family, especially when they believe in what you're building. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet of a few minutes earlier. This was contemplative silence, the kind that happens when people are reassessing everything they thought they knew. Rebecca finally found her voice. I wanted to tell people, but I was afraid they'd think less of my accomplishments, that they'd see me as someone who couldn't make it on her own. Instead, Tom said gently, you made it seem like Margaret didn't matter at all. The truth of his words hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca's tears came harder now, and I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for her. She'd worked so hard to build her professional image, to be seen as competent and independent, but in protecting that image, she'd erased the very person who'd made it possible. Sarah, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. Rebecca, no one would have thought less of you for having family support. Half the successful people I know had help getting started. But they would have wanted to know about Margaret, Jennifer added, looking at me with something approaching admiration. A woman with your business acumen and generosity. You're exactly the kind of person I'd want to meet at a networking event. I felt something shift inside me, a recognition I hadn't experienced in months. These successful, accomplished people weren't just being polite. They genuinely saw value in who I was and what I'd contributed. Tom picked up his wine glass from where someone had set it on the counter. I think, he said, raising it slightly, that we've been celebrating the wrong person tonight. The room held its breath as he continued. Don't get me wrong. Rebecca's success is impressive and well-deserved. But behind every great entrepreneur is someone who believed in them when belief was all they had. Someone who took a risk when the outcome was uncertain. He looked directly at me. Margaret, you're not just the old lady who's always around. You're the woman who saved a business, preserved jobs, and made tonight's celebration possible. I think it's time we acknowledged that properly. What would you do in my place? Would you accept the recognition? Or would you try to deflect it to keep the peace? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice when it matters most. Tom's words seemed to unlock something in the room. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Not the polite party chatter from earlier, but real conversation about business, family, and the complex relationships that make success possible. Marcus was the first to approach me directly. Margaret, I owe you an apology. If I'd known about your role in saving our business, I would have insisted on meeting you months ago. What you did, that kind of faith in someone's potential, it's exactly what the business world needs more of. You don't owe me anything, I said, though I appreciated his words more than I could express. I believed in Rebecca's vision. I still do. Jennifer had been quiet, but now she stepped closer. Margaret, I have to ask, do you still work in business? Because I know several companies that could use someone with your combination of financial expertise and judgment. I laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. I'm 67 years old, Jennifer. Most companies aren't exactly looking for employees my age. Consultants, she corrected firmly. Advisors, mentors. The business world is finally starting to recognize that experience has value, especially when it comes with the kind of wisdom you've demonstrated. Around us, the party had transformed into something entirely different. Rebecca's colleagues were no longer just celebrating her promotion. They were engaged in serious discussions about family businesses, intergenerational support, and the hidden stories behind entrepreneurial success. David appeared at my elbow, his face a mixture of pride and concern. "Mom, are you okay? I know this wasn't how you planned to spend the evening." "Actually," I said, looking around the room where I was now the center of respectful attention rather than polite tolerance, "I think this is exactly how the evening needed to go." Rebecca had been talking quietly with Sarah near the kitchen, but now she walked over to where Tom, Jennifer, and I were standing. Her makeup was smudged from crying, but her expression was clearer than I'd seen it in months. "Margaret," she said, her voice steady despite the tears, "I need to say something publicly, and I need to say it now." The room gradually quieted as people noticed Rebecca preparing to speak. She moved to the center of the living room, near the fireplace where she'd been telling her success story earlier in the evening. "I want everyone's attention for a moment," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "I need to correct something I said earlier, and I need to give credit where credit is due." The room fell completely silent. Even the background music seemed to pause. "When I told you all about building my business independently, about maintaining financial control, and not compromising my values, I was telling you only part of the truth. The part that made me look good, that fit the narrative I wanted to present." She looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. Genuine respect. "The complete truth is that when my business was failing, when I was facing bankruptcy and the loss of everything I'd worked for, I called my mother-in-law at 11 o'clock at night, crying and desperate. And she, this woman I've been treating like an inconvenience, like someone who was just always around, she saved my business. She saved my dreams. She saved my employees' jobs." Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Margaret withdrew $47,000 from her retirement savings and gave it to me with no contract, no repayment schedule, no expectation of return. She did it because she believed in what I was building, even when I'd stopped believing in it myself." The room was absolutely still. I could see people processing this information, understanding the magnitude of what Rebecca was revealing. Every success I've achieved since then, every client I've won, every promotion I've earned, it was built on the foundation of Margaret's faith in me. And instead of honoring that, instead of making sure everyone knew about the incredible woman who made it all possible, I've been treating her like she was invisible. Rebecca walked over to where I was standing, and to my surprise, she took my hands in hers. "Margaret, I am so sorry. Not just for tonight, not just for that horrible cup label, but for months of making you feel like you didn't matter. You matter more than I can express, and I've been too proud and too scared to admit it." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when everyone in a room recognizes they've witnessed something significant. A moment of genuine accountability and grace. Tom was the first to speak. "Rebecca, that took courage. And Margaret, what you did for her, that's the kind of generosity that changes lives." "It changes more than lives," Jennifer added. "It changes entire family legacies. The business Rebecca built with your help will provide for David and the twins for years to come. Your investment wasn't just in a company. It was in your family's future." I felt tears in my eyes, but they were different from the hurt tears I'd been fighting all evening. These were tears of recognition, of finally being seen for who I really was rather than dismissed for who I appeared to be. "There's something else," Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength. "Something I should have done months ago." She walked to the kitchen counter and returned with a small wrapped box I hadn't noticed earlier. "I had this made when the business hit its first million in revenue," she said, handing me the box. "I kept telling myself I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you, but the truth is, I was too proud to admit how much I owed you." Inside the box was a simple gold necklace with a pendant that took my breath away. It was a small golden key, engraved with the words, "The key to everything," and the date of her business launch. "Because that's what you were," Rebecca said softly, "the key to everything that came after." As I fastened the necklace around my neck, I realized that this evening had become something neither of us had planned, a moment of truth that would change our relationship forever. The necklace felt warm against my skin as I looked around the room at faces that now held genuine respect rather than polite dismissal. But even as I appreciated Rebecca's public acknowledgement, I knew we weren't finished. There were still things that needed to be said, wounds that needed to be addressed before we could truly move forward. "Rebecca," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "I appreciate your apology, and I treasure this gift. But I need you to understand something about what happened tonight, and what's been happening for months." She nodded, her face showing she was prepared to hear whatever I needed to say. "When I saw that cup label, when I realized that's how you see me, as the old lady who's always around, it wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time you've introduced me to your friends without using my name. Every time you've dismissed my suggestions or made me feel like I was intruding in your life." The room remained silent, but I could feel the attention of everyone present. These were business people who understood the importance of clear communication, of addressing problems directly rather than letting them fester. "I didn't give you that money because I wanted gratitude or recognition," I continued. "I gave it to you because I love my son, and I could see how much your success meant to him. I gave it to you because I believed in what you were building. But mostly, I gave it to you because I hoped that someday you might see me as family rather than as an obligation." Rebecca's tears started again, but she didn't look away. "Margaret, Let me finish," I said gently but firmly. "For months, I've watched you build this beautiful life with my son. I've seen you become an amazing mother to Emma and Jake, a successful businesswoman, a leader in your community. And I've been proud of you, even when you made it clear that my pride didn't matter to you." Tom shifted slightly, and I could see him processing not just the financial aspect of my story, but the emotional complexity of family relationships in business. "But tonight, listening to you tell your colleagues about your independence, about your principles regarding debt and equity, while I sat in the corner with a cup that labeled me as a nuisance. Tonight, I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting our family. It was enabling you to erase me from the story of your success." Jennifer stepped forward slightly. "Margaret, what you're describing, it's something many of us have experienced. Being undervalued, having our contributions minimized or ignored entirely. It takes tremendous courage to speak up." "It does," I agreed. "And I almost didn't. I almost went home tonight, threw away that cup, and pretended this never happened. But then I thought about Emma and Jake, and what they're learning about how to treat the people who love and support them." Rebecca's face crumpled at the mention of her children. "Oh God, Margaret, what have I been teaching them?" "That's exactly what I wondered," I said. "When Emma grows up and someone helps her achieve her dreams, will she remember to honor that person? When Jake faces a crisis and someone extends a helping hand, will he know how to show gratitude?" The room was so quiet, I could hear the ice maker cycling in the refrigerator. These successful, accomplished people were witnessing something raw and real, a family confrontation that went far beyond money or business success. "I don't want recognition for the sake of my ego," I said, looking directly at Rebecca. "I want to be treated like a person who matters, like someone whose opinions have value, whose presence is welcomed rather than tolerated, whose love for this family is seen as a gift rather than a burden." Marcus cleared his throat softly. "Rebecca, if I may, what Margaret is describing sounds like something that happens in business all the time. Key contributors get overlooked, their roles minimized, their value taken for granted. It's one of the biggest mistakes successful leaders make." "He's right," Tom added. "The best leaders I know make sure that everyone who contributes to their success gets recognized for it, not just publicly, but in the day-to-day interactions that show respect and appreciation." Rebecca walked over to me, and for a moment I thought she might collapse under the weight of what she was finally understanding. "Margaret, I have been treating you terribly. Not just tonight, but for months. And the worst part is, I didn't even realize I was doing it." "But you did realize it," I said quietly. "Every time you cropped me out of a photo, every time you redirected the children's attention when I was trying to connect with them, every time you made plans without including me, you knew what you were doing. You just didn't think it mattered." The truth of my words hung in the air between us. Rebecca's colleagues were getting a masterclass in accountability, watching someone confront the gap between intentions and impact. "You're right," Rebecca whispered. "I knew. I told myself I was protecting my independence, maintaining boundaries, keeping my professional and personal lives separate. But really, I was threatened by you." This admission surprised everyone in the room, including me. "Threatened by me?" "You're everything I'm afraid I'll never be," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "You raised 3 children alone after your husband died. You built a career in a male-dominated field. You saved enough money to help your family, even after supporting everyone else for decades. You have this quiet strength, this wisdom, this ability to see what really matters. She looked around the room at her colleagues, these people she'd been trying so hard to impress. I've been so focused on proving I could succeed on my own that I couldn't admit how much I needed you, how much I still need you. The silence that followed was different from all the others that evening. This was the silence of recognition, of truth finally being spoken, of relationships shifting in real time. "Rebecca," I said softly, "I never wanted you to feel threatened by me. I wanted to be your ally, your supporter, your friend. I wanted to be the mother-in-law who made your life easier, not harder." "You have been," she said, reaching for my hands again. "You've been all of those things, and I've been too proud and too scared to acknowledge it." Tom raised his wine glass again. "I think," he said, "that we're witnessing something remarkable here, not just a business success story, but a family learning how to truly see and value each other." He looked around the room at Rebecca's colleagues, all of whom had been drawn into this intimate moment of truth-telling. This is what real leadership looks like. Not just the ability to build a successful business, but the courage to acknowledge the people who made that success possible. As the room began to stir with quiet conversation, I realized that this confrontation had become something neither Rebecca nor I had expected, a moment of genuine transformation that would change not just our relationship, but how everyone present thought about success, family, and the courage it takes to tell the truth. "What would you do in my place? Would you accept this apology and move forward, or would you need more time to rebuild trust? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your voice and claiming your worth." 3 months later, I'm sitting in my kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching the autumn light filter through the maple trees on Elm Street. The leaves are turning gold and crimson, and there's a crispness in the Connecticut air that makes everything feel possible. My coffee mug, a beautiful ceramic one that Rebecca gave me, with Margaret written in elegant script, sits warm in my hands as I reflect on how much has changed since that night. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Real change never does. But it began that evening in Rebecca's living room, when truth finally broke through the polite silence that had been suffocating our relationship. The week after the party, Rebecca called me every day. Not the obligatory check-ins I'd grown accustomed to, but real conversations about business, about the children, about her fears and hopes for the future. She told me that several of her colleagues had reached out after the party, asking about my background and whether I'd be interested in consulting work. "Jennifer wants to introduce you to her network," Rebecca had said during one of those calls. "She thinks you'd be perfect for helping small businesses with financial planning and crisis management." I'd laughed, still adjusting to the idea that my experience had value beyond my own family. "I'm 67 years old, Rebecca. I'm not sure I'm ready to start a new career." "Maybe not a career," she'd replied, "but maybe something that lets you use all that wisdom you've been accumulating." She was right, of course. Within a month, I was consulting with 3 small businesses, helping them navigate cash flow challenges and make strategic decisions about growth. The work was energizing in a way I hadn't expected. It reminded me that my mind was still sharp, my instincts still sound, my experience still relevant. But the real change was in our family dynamic. Rebecca began including me in conversations about the business, asking for my input on major decisions. She started introducing me to her friends and colleagues by name, often adding details about my background or recent consulting work. The children noticed the difference immediately. Suddenly, Grandma wasn't just someone who brought cookies and gave hugs, but someone whose opinions mattered, whose stories were worth hearing. Last month, Rebecca asked me to join the board of advisors for her company. "I should have done this 2 years ago," she said, "not because you're family, but because you're exactly the kind of experienced voice we need." I accepted, of course, not just because it felt good to be valued, but because I genuinely believed I could contribute to the company's continued success. The necklace Rebecca gave me that night has become my favorite piece of jewelry. I wear it to business meetings, to family gatherings, to the grocery store. It reminds me that I am indeed the key to many things, not just Rebecca's business success, but my own worth, my family's strength, and the wisdom that comes from decades of quiet perseverance. Emma and Jake have started asking me about my work, about the businesses I help. about what it was like to be one of the few women in accounting when I was their age. These conversations fill me with hope, not just for their futures, but for the kind of adults they're becoming. David pulled me aside last week to thank me for what happened at the party. "Mom, I didn't realize how badly Rebecca was treating you. I should have spoken up sooner. You couldn't fix what I wasn't willing to address," I told him. "Sometimes we have to find our own voices, even when it's uncomfortable." The cup from that night sits in my kitchen cabinet now, the offensive label carefully removed and replaced with one that simply says, "Margaret's Cup." Rebecca brought it to me a few weeks after the party, along with a heartfelt letter about the lessons she'd learned from our confrontation. "I want you to keep this," she'd said, "as a reminder that we both grew from that night, that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most important changes." I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the courage it takes to speak up when you're being diminished, about the strength required to claim your worth when others would rather keep you invisible. I spent too many months accepting treatment that made me feel small, telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than demanding respect. But that night taught me something crucial. Silence in the face of disrespect isn't peacekeeping. It's self-erasure. And none of us, regardless of our age or position in the family hierarchy, deserves to be erased. This morning, I'm expecting a call from a startup founder who heard about my work through Jennifer's network. She's facing the same kind of crisis Rebecca faced 2 years ago, and she needs someone who understands both the financial and emotional challenges of keeping a business alive when everything seems to be falling apart. I'm ready for that conversation. I'm ready to share my experience, to offer my wisdom, to be the key that helps unlock someone else's potential. Because that's what I've learned about being the old lady who's always around. Sometimes being around is exactly what the world needs. The phone rings, and I answer it with confidence, ready to help another entrepreneur navigate the storms that threaten to sink their dreams. My voice is steady, my advice is sound, and my worth is no longer in question. After all, I'm not just Margaret, the woman who's always around. I'm Margaret, the woman who saves businesses, who speaks truth to power, who refuses to be invisible in her own life. And that, I've discovered, makes all the difference. The end.